Good evening and welcome. I'm so glad you're here tonight. Together, we'll wander back through time, revisiting quiet moments of ingenuity that quietly reshaped the world around us. Moments so subtle, you may have missed them when they happened, but their echoes are with us still. Tonight's story begins not with billion-dollar productions or streaming empires, but with a late fee and the small idea that followed. This is the full history of Netflix, a tale of unlikely beginnings, bold transformations, and the soft power of persistence. Let's take a breath and begin. It's 1997 in Scotts Valley, California. The light is gold and drowsy in the late afternoon, filtering through pine trees that line a quiet street off a business park. Inside a modest office, tucked away among other faceless startups, something invisible is beginning to stir. There's no sign on the door, no fanfare, just the soft click of keyboards, the hum of computers booting up, and the smell of burnt coffee wafting from a half-cleaned pot in the kitchenette. A small team works quietly. At the center of it all are two men, Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph. Reed is tall, thoughtful, and focused. He has the air of someone who listens more than he speaks, and when he speaks, you lean in. His background is in software and math. He once taught high school, spent time in the Peace Corps, earned a master's in computer science from Stanford. He isn't flashy, but there's precision behind his eyes. Mark is different. He talks with his hands. His brain jumps from idea to idea like stepping stones in a creek. He's the marketing guy, the pitchman, the one who pushes what if further than it should probably go. He's worked in direct mail, magazine subscriptions, early e-commerce. His gift isn't just dreaming up new ideas, it's knowing how to sell them. They've spent the last few months bouncing around concepts: personalized shampoo, dog food tailored to your breed, custom surfboards. None of it stuck. Too niche, too messy, too expensive. But one idea, one almost laughably simple idea, kept coming back: renting movies. Not in a store. Not with shelves. Not with fluorescent lights and awkward small talk at the counter. But online, by mail. Reed had been hit with a $40 late fee from Blockbuster after forgetting to return Apollo 13. It was frustrating, not just because of the money, but because of the principle. Renting a movie shouldn't feel like borrowing from a strict librarian. It should feel easy. So Mark suggested a test. They went to a music store, bought a compact disc, DVDs were still too rare to find easily, and mailed it to Reed's house. No packaging, no padding. Just a stamp and a paper envelope. If it arrived intact, maybe this crazy idea had legs. 3 days later, Reed opened his mailbox. The disc had arrived. No cracks, no damage. It worked. And with that, they had their spark. By the summer of 1998, Netflix.com was live. The website was simple, clean, spare, utilitarian. The kind of early internet design that looks quaint now but was quietly radical at the time. They had about 925 DVD titles in stock, nearly every movie available on the format. Users could browse, click, order. Within a few days, a red envelope would arrive in the mail. The experience was strange to some, delightful to others. No crowds. No late-night trips to the video store. No late fees. You watched the movie. You mailed it back. That's it. Inside the company, it was anything but simple. The logistics were a nightmare. Every DVD had to be scanned, sorted, cleaned, packaged, and shipped from a small warehouse. Inventory was tight. The DVD market was still in its infancy. A surprising number of customers never returned their discs. Margins were razor thin. But every problem solved made the model stronger. Within a year, the company had grown modestly but sustainably. Still, it wasn't enough. They were competing against a Goliath. Blockbuster at the time was a juggernaut. Over 9,000 stores, tens of thousands of employees. Brand recognition so baked into American culture that "Let's go to Blockbuster" was a Friday night mantra. They rented out VHS tapes from gleaming blue and yellow stores that felt like the center of the entertainment universe. Snacks, posters, aisles and aisles of choices. But they had one fatal flaw: late fees. Roughly $800 million per year, about 16% of their revenue, came from late fees alone. They were irritating, punitive, and as it turned out, the perfect wedge for someone to drive a new model into the market. Netflix's founders saw the gap. In 1999, they made their next big move. They ditched the pay-per-rental model entirely and introduced a subscription. One flat monthly fee, unlimited rentals. Keep 3 discs at a time, watch them, return them, and the next one in your queue ships out the same day. No deadlines, no penalties, no stress. It was revolutionary. Not just because of what it offered, but because of what it removed: obligation. Netflix became a soft presence in people's lives, not demanding attention, just offering companionship. The red envelope became a ritual, something to look forward to. A gentle thud in the mailbox, followed by the quiet anticipation of movie night. And for some people, it became more than that. It became comfort. In 2000, Reed and Mark faced a crossroads. Though the subscription model was gaining traction, Netflix was still bleeding money. Operational costs were immense. Warehouses, postage, labor, software, inventory. The math wasn't friendly. Each new customer brought revenue, yes, but also real-world physical logistics to fulfill. And the world around them was shifting. The dot-com bubble had started to pop. One by one, tech companies were collapsing. Investors were growing nervous. Risk tolerance was low, optimism lower. They flew to Dallas, Texas, and stepped into the headquarters of Blockbuster Inc. They weren't there for a fight. They were there with an offer. $50 million. That's what Reed Hastings was asking. In return, Blockbuster would acquire Netflix. Reed and his team would run the digital arm. Blockbuster would continue to dominate retail stores. Together, they could own the future, online and offline. For a moment, the room was quiet. Then came the laughter. Blockbuster executives weren't interested. Streaming? Online rentals? A tiny company with no physical presence and no profit. Not a chance. They turned Netflix down flat. Reed and Mark flew home. No deal. No partnership. No lifeline. Just a small, fragile company in California with a clever idea and a short runway. But something else came home with them, too. Clarity. If Blockbuster wasn't going to buy them, they were going to beat Blockbuster. Not through ads or lawsuits or price wars, but with time. And an almost fanatical attention to their system. They doubled down on logistics. Every envelope was analyzed. Could it be thinner? More durable, less likely to jam a postal sorting machine? They tested over 200 iterations of the iconic red mailer. Each improvement shaved fractions of a cent off cost. Each saved penny bought them more runway. They opened more distribution centers, automated parts of the sorting process, built proprietary software to predict shipping paths based on zip codes and return patterns. Turnaround time dropped. Customer satisfaction rose. Word of mouth spread. They weren't winning by being flashy. They were winning by being quietly a better. And customers noticed. By 2002, Netflix had over 600,000 subscribers, and they were ready to go public. The IPO wasn't extravagant, but it was enough. Enough to pay down debt. Enough to secure stability. Enough to keep shipping red envelopes to mailboxes across the country. They listed on the NASDAQ under the ticker NFLX, share price on opening day, $15. No one knew what it would become, but Reed did. Because Reed wasn't chasing movies, he was chasing the curve. Behind the scenes, Netflix was already thinking years ahead. They began collecting data, ratings, preferences, watch patterns. At the time, it was simple. Thumbs up or down, 5-star ratings. But it wasn't just to improve recommendations. It was to learn. Not what movies people said they liked, but what they actually watched. If someone rated foreign dramas 5 stars but kept rewatching Legally Blonde, that told you something. That was truth. And truth in data is gold. They began refining their recommendation system, eventually developing an algorithm so effective that they launched a global contest to improve it. The Netflix prize, $1 million to any team that could increase the accuracy of their predictive model by 10%. It took years, Teams of data scientists competed from around the world. Eventually, someone won. The algorithm was impressive, but Netflix never implemented it. Too complex, too difficult to scale. Still, the competition wasn't about the code. It was about the signal. Netflix was quietly announcing, we aren't just a rental service, we're a tech company. By 2005, DVDs were no longer exotic. They were everywhere, cheap, portable, mass-produced. Netflix had nearly 5 million subscribers. Blockbuster had begun to stagger. They'd tried launching an online service of their own, but it was clunky, reactive, built in haste, and worse. Because they still relied heavily on late fees and in-store revenue, their business model couldn't pivot cleanly. Every innovation that Netflix introduced, faster shipping, better curation, no fees, was something Blockbuster couldn't match without undermining itself. Netflix didn't just have a better product, it had no baggage. And it was about to change again. In the background of all this was a larger shift. The internet was growing. Broadband was spreading. YouTube had launched in 2005, proving that people would happily watch video on a screen, any screen, as long as it was fast and easy. And Netflix noticed. They began quietly testing the waters. What if, one day, you didn't have to wait for the red envelope? What if the movie simply appeared? In 2007, they launched Watch Instantly. Streaming had arrived. At first, it was modest. A few thousand titles, mostly older films, documentaries, TV reruns. The picture quality was grainy. There were buffering issues. Compatibility was limited to PCs. But it worked. For the first time, subscribers could press play and something would begin. It didn't replace DVDs, not yet. But it planted a seed, a new kind of habit, one that didn't depend on shipping or storage or return dates. It was the future peeking through the curtain. And Netflix was listening. Streaming had arrived quietly. There was no press conference, no viral campaign, just a soft button that appeared on the website, Watch Instantly. For most people, it was a curiosity, a novelty, a fun alternative to waiting for the mail. But inside Netflix, it was everything. It marked a shift, not just in format, but in identity. Because once you remove the disc, you remove the warehouse. You remove the postage, you remove friction, and you open the door to scale beyond anything physical infrastructure could ever allow. In 2007, the catalog was small, around 1,000 titles. The video quality? Acceptable if not impressive. And there were limitations. Only certain operating systems were supported. Streaming was capped. The selection wasn't the latest blockbuster, but the kind of movies you'd find in the staff picks shelf of an indie video store. But even so, people used it. They clicked. They explored. They binge-watched before the term existed. And Netflix paid attention. Meanwhile, DVDs were still humming along. In fact, the company wouldn't retire its DVD by mail service for another 16 years. For a while, Netflix ran on two rails, one foot in the physical, one in the digital. It was a strange and fragile balance. But the trajectory was clear. The more people streamed, the less they returned DVDs. And as broadband expanded, house by house, year by year, so too did the appetite for instant access. Customers weren't just asking for movies anymore. They were asking for now. Blockbuster, still reeling from its earlier missteps, tried to respond. They launched their own streaming platform in partnership with Enron's failed broadband service. It was clumsy, slow, poorly marketed, and too late. They still operated thousands of physical stores, each a monument to a business model built on scarcity. But streaming was abundance. It was infinite shelf space. It was tailored choice. It was always open. By the end, those blue and yellow stores began to go dark, one by one. Friday night at Blockbuster became a memory. And in the quiet left behind, Netflix grew louder. The company's next great leap wasn't technological. It was creative. By 2011, Netflix realized something important. Streaming was powerful, but it came with a new problem. Content. They didn't own it. They were licensing movies and shows from other studios at increasingly high prices. As the platform grew, so did those fees. And worse, the studios had begun to notice that Netflix was a threat. Why license your content to a competitor when you could launch your own service? Deals became harder, more expensive, riskier. They needed to make their own content. Hollywood wasn't convinced. A tech company? Making television? Unlikely. But Reed Hastings and his team weren't trying to play by Hollywood rules. They were building their own system, one powered by data. Years of watching user behavior had taught them what people clicked on, paused, replayed, skipped. They weren't guessing. They were programming. And their first major swing? A political drama called House of Cards, starring Kevin Spacey, directed by David Fincher. Based on a British series, it was dark, glossy, expensive. And in 2013, they did something unheard of. They released the entire season at once. The reaction was immediate. People didn't just watch House of Cards, they devoured it. In one weekend, tens of thousands of viewers watched the entire season. Water cooler talk changed overnight. No longer were people discussing what happened last night. They were asking, how far in are you? Netflix had quietly invented a new form of television. It wasn't episodic, it was seasonal. And with it, a new word entered the cultural bloodstream: binge watch. One success would have been impressive, but Netflix followed it with another, then another. Orange is the New Black, a prison dramedy that blurred genre lines. BoJack Horseman, an animated series that tackled depression, celebrity, and failure with surreal wit. Stranger Things, an 80s-inspired thriller filled with heart, monsters, and Eggo waffles. Each was unique. Each was entirely Netflix. And perhaps most important of all, each belonged to no one else. They had become more than a platform. They had become a studio, a brand, a place where stories lived, not just stories they bought, but stories they birthed. Netflix originals began winning Emmys. Critics reevaluated the company. No longer a tech firm, not just a disruptor, but a full-fledged entertainment empire. And behind it all, data quietly fed the engine. What thumbnails worked best? What time did people watch the most? What genres were underserved? Every click was a whisper. Netflix listened. By 2016, Netflix had a bold new plan: global expansion. Not in stages, not gradually, all at once. In a single announcement during the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, Netflix flipped the switch from a single continent to nearly the entire planet. One moment, people were waiting. The next, they were watching. It was a breathtaking logistical feat, and a risky one. Each country came with its own regulations, its own internet speeds, its own culture, language, and tastes. But Netflix wasn't coming in with just a product. They were coming in with a philosophy. Let people watch what they want, when they want, how they want. No censors, no schedules, no borders, just stories. To make that work, they had to think differently. American content didn't travel everywhere. Not naturally, not always. So Netflix began investing in local productions, not just licensing foreign films, but actively funding and creating original content in other countries. Germany, India, Brazil, South Korea, Nigeria, Spain. They hired regional teams, local producers, native talent. These weren't just subtitles slapped on Hollywood shows. These were series made from the ground up, by and for people in their own language. And then Netflix did something unexpected. They didn't silo the content, they promoted it everywhere. A German sci-fi series might appear front and center on an American home screen. A South Korean thriller might trend in Canada. A French heist series might find fans in Singapore. Stories weren't just traveling. They were colliding, finding new audiences in places they were never meant to go. It all came to a head in 2021. A strange, brutal little show appeared on the platform. No stars, no franchise, no marketing blitz. It was called Squid Game, a survival thriller from South Korea. Violent, not exactly mainstream. And yet, within days, it exploded. It became the most watched series in Netflix history. Over 1.6 billion hours viewed in its first 4 weeks. The world couldn't stop talking about it. Memes, costumes, analysis, think pieces. It wasn't just a hit. It was proof. Proof that Netflix's global gamble had worked. That people didn't care about borders, accents, or origin stories. If the story was good, they'd watch. Anywhere. This was Netflix at its most quietly powerful. Not loud, not boastful, just everywhere. Stories in dozens of languages, watched on thousands of devices across hundreds of countries. And behind the scenes, a constant pulse of data told the company what resonated, what fell flat, what might succeed next. It was content, yes, but it was also culture, shaped by viewers, shaped by the invisible rhythm of what people clicked on while waiting for dinner to finish, shaped by boredom, curiosity, nostalgia, loneliness,
Apamodide katamagdaklawan cultures bidding?
excitement. Whatever you were feeling, Netflix had something to match it. And if it didn't, it would soon. By 2018, the landscape looked different. Netflix, once the scrappy underdog, had become the reigning king. But that throne was beginning to wobble. Other companies had watched closely, too closely perhaps. They'd seen Netflix turn data into dominance, turn convenience into a cultural default, and they wanted in. The golden age of Netflix's unchallenged reign was ending, and a new era was beginning. They called it the streaming wars. First came Amazon. Amazon Prime Video had existed quietly for years, bundled in with the company's famous shipping perks. But now they were investing heavily, building their own studio, greenlighting prestige projects, winning awards. Then came Hulu. A joint venture between multiple networks, Hulu positioned itself as the home for current television. While Netflix pushed full-season drops, Hulu offered weekly release schedules, bringing back the water cooler moments Netflix had quietly eroded. Then came Apple. In 2019, Apple TV Plus launched with splashy press events, sleek branding, and billion-dollar budgets. They signed stars, funded passion projects, won Oscars. And then, Disney. With the launch of Disney Plus, the gloves came off. Here was a brand that had built the childhoods of entire generations. They didn't need to build a catalog, they already had it. Star Wars, Marvel, Pixar, National Geographic, Disney Vault Classics. It wasn't just a competitor, it was a juggernaut. Netflix found itself surrounded. Content was being pulled back. Licenses were expiring. Studios were no longer interested in renting their IP to someone else when they could keep it and build their own empires. The Office, long one of Netflix's most-watched series, left for Peacock. Friends moved to HBO Max. Disney content, once a staple on Netflix, was gone entirely. And with it went millions of casual comfort watchers. Netflix had known this day would come. They weren't caught off guard, but they were forced to shift. The response? Spend. Netflix began investing more than ever in its original content, not just shows and movies, but genres, languages, formats, markets. They signed massive production deals with creators like Shonda Rhimes' Grey's Anatomy, Ryan Murphy Glee, American Horror Story, and the Obamas, who launched their own content company through Netflix. They doubled down on animation, documentaries, unscripted shows, and stand-up comedy specials. They pushed the limits of scale. By 2021, Netflix was spending over $17 billion a year on content. It was a race to not just stay relevant, but stay ahead. And for a while, it worked. Subscriber numbers climbed. Viewership soared. Awards piled up. The Queen's Gambit, a quiet, stylized miniseries about a chess prodigy, became a surprise global hit, causing a spike in chessboard sales. Bridgerton, a Regency-era romance filled with scandal, color-conscious casting, and modern music, shattered records and redefined what period dramas could be. Netflix had range. They could go from brutal sci-fi like Black Mirror to calming travel food shows with Zac Efron. They weren't aiming for one type of viewer. They were aiming for every viewer, all at once. But the more Netflix grew, the more cracks began to show. In 2022, for the first time in more than a decade, the unthinkable happened. They lost subscribers. Roughly 200,000 users disappeared in a single quarter. The stock plummeted. Investors panicked. Was the growth engine stalling? Had the market become too saturated? Or was Netflix simply no longer novel? Inside the company, conversations shifted. What had once been guiding philosophy, no ads, no constraints, total freedom, was now up for debate. They began to test new models. An ad-supported subscription tier, tighter rules on password sharing, more regional pricing experiments, fewer expensive gambles, more accountability. The era of growth at any cost was ending. And Netflix, for the first time in its adult life, had to do something it had rarely done before: pull back. By mid-2020, under pressure, it was a strange reversal. For years, they had been the disruptor, the innovator, the outsider shaking up old empires. But now they were the ones with the empire to protect. Competitors were circling. Investors were growing impatient. And the culture that Netflix had helped create, instant, boundless, on-demand streaming, had matured into something less forgiving. Consumers had choices now. Too many, perhaps. Disney Plus, HBO Max, Peacock, Paramount Plus, Apple TV Plus, Amazon Prime Video, each one carving away market share, attention, and content. The average viewer wasn't just choosing what they were choosing where to belong. And increasingly, they were choosing multiple places for a while, then canceling, then returning, then canceling again. The age of subscriber loyalty was ending, and with it, some of Netflix's certainty. So Netflix began to ask itself, what's next? If being first was no longer enough, what could still set them apart? They didn't want to become just another app, just another option. They wanted to be essential. So they returned to a principle that had guided them before: expansion through experimentation. Try, learn, adjust, repeat. And they started looking beyond traditional television and film. The first move: gaming. It was an unexpected pivot. In 2021, Netflix began rolling out mobile games as part of its subscription service. No extra cost, no in-app purchases, no ads. Just included. It wasn't a flashy launch. There were no massive announcements, no console partnerships, just a small, growing library of games available through the Netflix app on Android and iOS. At first, it felt like a side project. But to Netflix, it was strategic. The idea wasn't to become the next Xbox or PlayStation. It was to deepen engagement, to keep people in the Netflix ecosystem even when they weren't watching. Gaming wasn't about competition, it was about companionship, something to play on the train, on your lunch break. Between shows, a new type of story, a different kind of immersion. They began acquiring indie studios, hiring developers, building slowly, quietly, just like they always had. The second move: live content. This was a bigger leap and a riskier one. For years, Netflix had avoided live broadcasts. The entire appeal of their platform was on demand. No schedules, no waiting. But in 2023, that changed. They aired their first global live comedy special, Chris Rock's Selective Outrage. It wasn't just a one-off, it was a signal. Netflix was exploring a new type of viewing: communal, time-sensitive, moment-driven. Live sports, live reality shows, awards ceremonies. These were now on the table. And while their first attempts weren't flawless, there were delays, outages, growing pains. It was the beginning of something new. Another branch, another experiment, another quiet evolution. But perhaps the most symbolic moment of all came later that same year. Netflix announced the end of its DVD by mail service. The red envelopes, those quiet, iconic signals of the company's beginnings, would stop being sent. The final discs were mailed out in September of 2023. Some customers, longtime subscribers, received extras, a surprise handful of bonus DVDs, a thank you gesture, a farewell. There were no commercials, no nationwide campaigns, just a brief message, a bow, and silence. It was the end of an era, not just for Netflix, but for media as a whole. The age of physical media was drawing to a close, not suddenly, not with a bang, but with a whisper. A generation that had grown up checking mailboxes for movies had now grown used to tapping screens. The disc had served its purpose. It had built the bridge. Now the bridge was no longer needed. And Netflix kept moving. So where are we now? What is Netflix today? It's a streaming platform, yes. A studio, a data company, a brand, a verb. But it's also something more abstract, a space, a background presence, a part of daily life that doesn't always demand your attention, but quietly fills the edges. You open it without thinking. You scroll, you browse, you watch, sometimes for hours, sometimes for 15 minutes, sometimes to feel, sometimes to not feel. Netflix isn't just competing with other platforms anymore. It's competing with sleep, with silence, with your mood. And that awareness has shaped the way they tell stories. Series today are built to hold you. Cliffhangers calibrated, episode lengths tuned, algorithms tested. Thumbnails are A/B tested in real time, swapping actor faces, colors, compositions. Your homepage is yours alone. A romantic comedy on your screen might be a dark thriller on someone else's. Same movie, different introduction. Netflix is no longer one platform. It's millions, one for each subscriber. This is personalization at a scale the founders could have barely imagined. But it didn't happen overnight. It happened through slow, quiet shifts. One click, one recommendation, one adjustment at a time. And yet, for all the tech and tailoring and machine learning, the soul of Netflix remains the same. It's about storytelling, the kind that finds you when you need it, that helps you feel less alone, that entertains you, distracts you, surprises you, that doesn't ask questions, just shows up when you're ready. Whether it's a prestige drama, a stand-up special, a nature documentary, a cooking show, a true crime binge, or a Korean survival game, it's all part of the same offering. A library of moods, a buffet of feeling, a digital campfire, burning softly behind glass. By now, Netflix was no longer just changing how people watch stories, it was changing how people told them. Inside writers' rooms across the industry, a new kind of pressure emerged, one shaped indirectly by algorithms. The goal wasn't just to tell a great story. It was to retain the viewer. Every episode needed a hook, a cliffhanger, a next episode that demanded to be clicked. Dialogue had to grab attention in the first minute. Story arcs had to be bingeable, linear, high-pacing, tight continuity. In traditional television, a show had time to find its rhythm. A bad pilot might be forgiven if episode 3 landed. But in the Netflix age, you had 8 seconds before the viewer backed out and clicked something else. And so, slowly, quietly, stories began to mutate. Longer title sequences disappeared. Recaps were shortened or removed entirely. Shows opened in the middle of action, not the beginning. Everything needed to move, and move now. Some critics called it the streaming squeeze, where narrative complexity was trimmed to fit bingeable formats. Others defended it. They argued this was just evolution. TV had always changed to fit its delivery system. First radio, then broadcast, then cable, now streaming. And maybe they were right. But either way, the medium had shifted, and Netflix was its gravity center. Even outside entertainment, Netflix was changing behavior. You could feel it in casual conversation. People no longer asked, "Did you see that episode last night?" They asked, "Have you finished it yet?" Entire seasons were consumed in weekends. Story arcs that used to stretch over months now passed in the span of a single feverish Saturday. Critics struggled to keep up. Spoiler culture fractured. Social media timelines blurred. Some mourned the loss of shared pacing. Others reveled in the freedom. One thing was clear. Netflix had untethered television from time, and it wasn't going back. But not all change is comfortable. As Netflix grew, so did its power. And with power came scrutiny. Some questioned the influence of algorithms on creativity. If the most watched content was always what got renewed, where did that leave shows that were brilliant but niche, thoughtful but slow? Dozens of beloved series were canceled after a season or two, often without resolution. Fans would wake up to find their favorite story simply gone. No finale, no goodbye. Just removed from the homepage, quietly erased. The cost of efficiency was emotional whiplash. The user was never meant to notice the machine behind the curtain. But now, they did. Others raised concerns about labor. As Netflix ramped up production, thousands of projects in development around the world, questions emerged about conditions. Writers' rooms shrinking in size, budgets being squeezed, residuals disappearing in a royalty model that favored hits and ignored everything else. In 2023, these tensions spilled into the open. Hollywood writers went on strike, and Netflix was one of the companies at the center of it all. The strike lasted months. It wasn't just about pay. It was about the future. Who owns a show? What does a fair cut look like in the age of streaming? And what happens when algorithms begin writing scripts? These weren't hypothetical concerns. AI was already being tested to write marketing copy, automate dubbing, localize scripts, generate plot summaries. Some feared it was only a matter of time before the AI wrote the show itself. Netflix didn't confirm or deny much. As always, they listened, adapted, moved forward, quietly. But even amid the questions and controversy, the platform kept evolving. New shows launched, new stars were born. Some flopped, some soared. Wednesday, a reimagining of the Addams Family daughter, became a global sensation, thanks in part to a viral dance scene and a magnetic performance by Jenna Ortega. The Sandman, long considered unfilmable, finally reached the screen. That lavish, strange, meditative. All Quiet on the Western Front, a brutal German-language war film, became an awards season favorite. These weren't just hits, they were statements. Proof that Netflix could still surprise you, still move you, still show you something you hadn't seen before. At the same time, the platform continued to expand horizontally. Interactive storytelling, like Bandersnatch, a choose-your-own-adventure film from the creators of Black Mirror, pushed the boundaries of what a movie could be. Netflix began exploring spatial storytelling, VR content, gaming integrations, even physical experiences. In some cities, you could walk into a Netflix-branded pop-up restaurant or attend a live Bridgerton-themed ball or buy merchandise from Stranger Things in a branded store. Netflix wasn't just on your screen anymore. It was in your world. It was becoming a world. A kind of soft, ever-present entertainment layer over daily life. But where does it go from here? What happens next? No one knows. Not even Netflix. And that may be its secret weapon. It doesn't need a grand 5-year plan. It just needs enough room to experiment. Enough space to listen. Enough time to make small bets and kill them quickly if they don't work. 1 foot in data. 1 foot in instinct. Always walking forward. And maybe that's the lesson. In the end, Netflix isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. It was never the fastest, never the flashiest. It wasn't first to market. It didn't invent streaming. It didn't invent television. But it watched, it waited, it adapted. And in doing so, it quietly reshaped everything. Not just how we watch, but when. And why? And with who? There's a strange paradox at the heart of Netflix. It's one of the most visible companies in the world. Its name alone conjures hours of associations, habits, memories, and yet it has always been quiet. No mascots, no jingles, no flashy Super Bowl commercials, no loud logos on city billboards. Netflix has never really shouted. It has whispered, gently, consistently, insistently. It whispered through red envelopes on kitchen counter, through loading bars at 11:47 p.m., through thumbnails that knew just how to catch your eye, through little notes like, "Are you still watching?" It slipped into your daily rhythm, not as an event, but as a presence. And in doing so, it didn't just reflect culture, it shaped it. Think for a moment about the words Netflix helped invent, or at least popularize. Binge watch. Cue. Next episode. Skip intro. Tiny phrases. Functional commands. Yet they transformed how stories moved through our lives. They made watching active and passive at the same time. You were in control. And yet you were carried. You didn't plan your night around TV anymore. TV planned itself around you. And that simple shift, the inversion of choice, reverberated outward. Streaming became the dominant mode of entertainment. Physical media sales collapsed. Cable subscriptions fell year after year. Networks scrambled to launch their own services. Advertisers pivoted. Nielsen ratings became less relevant. Entire generations now grow up without any memory of channel surfing. For them, Netflix isn't new. It's normal, ordinary, expected, like tap water or electricity, always there. And perhaps that is the most quietly powerful transformation of all. But even in its ordinariness, Netflix has never stopped evolving. In 2024, the company is still experimenting, still asking strange questions in boardrooms and late-night Slack threads. What else can be content? Can a podcast be a show? Can a video game become a film? Can a TikTok creator anchor a prestige drama? Can storytelling be global from the start, not just translated afterward? These are not theoretical musings. They are ongoing experiments. Some will fail. Some will be forgotten. But a few, just a few, might change everything again. And what of Netflix's competitors? They're still out there. Disney Plus dominates family content. HBO Max, rebranded again, owns the prestige drama crown. Apple TV Plus plays the awards game with sharp taste and deep pockets. Amazon continues to blur the line between shipping empire and content powerhouse. The field is crowded. The pie is sliced thinner each year. But Netflix has something they don't: a head start. A global reach few can rival, and a decade's worth of behavioral data, infrastructure, and loyalty built slowly like sediment layering into stone. It might not be the trendiest app anymore, but it is undeniably the blueprint, the one that changed everything. And so, what does it all mean? What is the legacy of Netflix? Not just as a company, but as a cultural force? The answer is quieter than you'd expect. Because the story of Netflix isn't really about profit or tech or patents. It's about timing. About listening to the subtle needs of an audience that didn't even know what it wanted yet. It's about removing friction. About letting people watch what they wanted without judgment or delay. It's about trust. Trust that the next episode will be there. Trust that the story will continue. Trust that, whatever your mood, there's something waiting for you. Not because you deserve it, not because you earned it, but just because it's there. Like a friend who doesn't ask questions, just sits beside you and presses play. Netflix didn't change the world with fanfare. It didn't conquer Hollywood by storming the gates. It crept in. One disc, one stream, one show at a time. It earned its place by understanding that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is make it easy to watch something good. And so we end where we began. Not with the dazzle of billion-dollar productions, not with the spectacle of streaming wars, but with a quiet moment, a forgotten late fee, a white envelope, a test in the mail, and two men who believed that stories didn't have to be loud to matter. They just had to arrive on time and ready to play. Thank you for joining me tonight. I hope this journey through the quiet, extraordinary history of Netflix has offered you something soft to hold on to, whether that's perspective, curiosity, or just the comfort of a well-told story. If you're still awake, maybe you're reflecting. If you're drifting off, let your dreams carry you gently onward. And wherever you are, in this moment or the next, I hope your next story finds you just when you need it. Until next time, good night.